if you're sitting across the table from a strong rectangle theory avatar versus a weak rectangle theory avatar. Now, if there's some cool aspects of that where there's a little bit of balance here, Pathfinder supposedly is producing a rectangle every turn, right? It's tapping and putting a site into play. However, you're starting the game down 3 rectangles. So you're not actually generating any value on that rectangle until you put your 4th site into play. Because the movement, unless you're leveraging the movement somehow, but that's like a whole different conversation when it comes to that. Like, how much is the movement of a square that you don't necessarily have full control over actually, like, what is the value of that? What is the potency of that?
All right, Phil. So you were talking about avatar rectangle theory, something that you've poured over from Magic. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So this is a theory that I have had in the back of my mind. There's like a handful of Magic the Gathering deck building theories that, you know, are nice to apply to like keep yourself from going too far off the rails when you come up with new ideas or cool brews or whatever. If you find yourself getting a little too lost in the sauce, it's like sort of nice to have baseline theories to like give yourself some reliability as to like, you know, foil them against to see if what you're doing is like par for the course, or if you're just like, you know, out and about and not actually hitting a target. And when I was playing Seer recently, so I played, in my limited experience so far, outside of the games that we've played for content, which is coming, the 2 avatars that I've played in sanctioned events so far have been Archimago, which is the first event that I played in that you handed me, and then I tested out Seer because I thought that the power level of being able to scry every turn to find your elites and uniques more reliably was going to be really potent. Between those 2 things, what I found was I was like, oh, avatars, particularly with 13 new avatars coming out in Gothic in less than a month, I was like, avatar rectangle theory might actually be applicable here, which is, it's not avatar rectangle theory, it's rectangle theory. And it's a theory in Magic the Gathering limited, where essentially you try and boil down the power level of any individual card by the number of game pieces it's able to generate. And so by comparing that to, you know, across the table, without having to think about the specifics of the cards, it just gives you a nice baseline to be like, if this card like enters the battlefield and generates 2 tokens, that has created 2 additional rectangles. So this thing is worth 3 rectangles, right? It literally made 3 game objects. And if there's another card that doesn't produce any game objects, then theoretically that thing would be softer. Or if this thing produces the same amount of game objects, but it takes a full turn cycle, or if it takes 2 turn cycles to produce that many rectangles, like which one is then like, how do you then compare and contrast? And that's where you can get into like format speed and things like this. But for avatars in particular, it can really boil down to, when it comes to competitive play, what I found was the avatars that I competed against that produce rectangles that are very, very strong in rectangle theory just seem to be outclassing the avatars that don't produce any rectangles. So when I was playing Seer, I mean, right now the top avatar has to be Druid, right? And if you think about how many rectangles Druid can produce, it's sort of as many as, like, if a Tawny were to die every turn, it produces a critical, meaningful rectangle every turn, right? Every time you play a site. That's really powerful. And then later in the game, it can also produce a Royal Bodyguard, which is a pretty potent rectangle, right? So at a baseline, it's producing, you know, over the course of a game, on average, how many Tawnies, right? And then it can also make Bruin. So it's like, okay, this thing, let's say hypothetically, is worth 5 rectangles, right? It's going to produce Tawny at least four times over a course of a game, plus Bruin. So, you know, if we were to average it out and say that it's 5 rectangles, being an avatar that generates 5 potent rectangles is really good, particularly since and then you can, you know, dive into how valuable Tawny is as a spellcaster and a flying mover, and like all of the cards that are then included entirely because of what Druid offers as a mechanic, right? Like, you play both of your Torhammer's trinkets because you know that you can put them on Tawny and you're guaranteed to have a body to put them on. Or you can play, what's that, the card that sacrifices a creature to draw cards?
A Pact with the Devil.
Pact with the Devil. You can play Pact with the Devil way more reliably, knowing that your avatar is just going to give you the rectangle to sacrifice to it. So when we, like, in one of the new avatars coming out is Necromancer, and Necromancer for 1 mana just lets you produce a skeleton. Now, there's some drawbacks to the skeletons in that it can't move to defend, but the fact that for 1 mana every turn you get to generate a rectangle. Now that rectangle will produce some amount of value, whether it's a full card's worth of value or like against your opponent or not, like if they spend, you know, a single removal spell on it. But there are things that you can do with that rectangle that then make it really potent for when analyzing new avatars and being like, well, there's so many new avatars coming out. How am I supposed to figure out which ones I'm supposed to play around with in a competitive space or not? And I think that you could probably categorize the most powerful avatars by the ones that really lean into rectangle theory until some other outside force or specific switches that up. So if you think about how we've been talking about Archimago, Archimago leans really hard into the rectangle theory. Even though it's not producing the physical rectangle immediately, it is giving you a third of a rectangle every time you draw a spell. Because then you can flash it back, and that's so for every 3 spells, it's producing another rectangle, and that rectangle could then generate however many more rectangles, right? If I flash back Poison Nova and hit 3 for 1 you, well, then not only did I produce a rectangle, but then I got rid of 3 of yours, and so just as a baseline card equity, 1 avatar activation went up 4 cards, right? So when looking at Seer is not very good in the rectangle theory, right? It produces no rectangles. It gives you selection, but then all of the selection that it's giving you, if you are sitting down against an avatar that's going to generate however many rectangles for them, that's value that you're going to have to overcome somehow. So you're going to need to, like, in your deck building, be like, well, if I sit down against Druid, I'm going to have ways to just stop stuff that is free for them, which means that I'm already at a deck building disadvantage because I have to use resources against something that they don't have to consider or take into account at all for what's providing value for them. And if you're that is an inherent disadvantage if you're sitting across the table from a strong rectangle theory avatar versus a weak rectangle theory avatar. Now, if there's some cool aspects of that where there's a little bit of balance here, like Pathfinder supposedly is producing a rectangle every turn, right? It's tapping and putting a site into play. However, you're starting the game down 3 rectangles. So you're not actually generating any value on that rectangle until you put your 4th site into play. Because yes, the movement, unless you're leveraging the movement somehow, but that's like a whole different conversation when it comes to that. Like, how much is the movement of a square that you don't necessarily have full control over actually, like, what is the value of that? What is the potency of that? But at a baseline, something to think about as we get a bunch of new avatars is, does this avatar produce rectangles for free? And if so, what is the value of those rectangles? And then that will help you categorize, like, which avatars you should probably start brewing with first, because the ceiling on the ones that produce a lot of rectangles are just going to be a lot higher.
Hey, everybody. You know it would be both unique and exceptional if you joined us at patreon.com/eternaldurls under the Magicians tier to get all of our sorcery content.
By joining us, you help us pump out more elite content for you.
Now back to the show. Phil, I want to let's do a little let's do a little exercise here, right? Here we are, sorcery Moxfield for sorcery up on the chat. So assuming that we are allowed to show this by the time this episode comes up, you can go to sorcery.moxfield.com and check out this site, which is basically a really great search engine for sorcery, and eventually they'll have some other stuff coming as well. But I just wanted to look at every avatar that's out so far, right? And then we can talk about, we can't rank them. I don't have a ranking system. I'm not doing that, like, S tier thing.
Tier stuff,
silly. Yeah. But we can sort of compare them to each other. So if you look at Archimago, let's say that every card you draw, he's producing 1/3 of a card. You draw a card every turn. So over the course of let's say your average game is like 7 to 9 turns, and you start with 3 cards. This guy's producing on average, an extra 3 to 4 cards a game.
Well, I should caveat here for Archimago, which is not producing literally a physical rectangle when its ability is there.
Sure.
But
the equivalent.
At a baseline, let's say the cards themselves didn't actually do anything additional other than be a rectangle. It's producing 1/3 of a rectangle every time you draw a spell. Now, that means that, like, when you're looking at, like, I remember when we were talking about Archimago and I learned that the card Tithe existed, I was like, this card is insane. Because not only is it, by every time you draw a site, you're not drawing the additional 3rd card that Archimago offers you. And so if you can just play the things that draw you sites so you don't have to spend your turn drawing sites, you can spend your turn drawing an additional 1/3 of a card. Now, the value of Archimago and why it's so powerful is a lot of the cards that you're putting in are inherently 2-for-1s. And so if you get to flashback those 2-for-1s for free, those things are generating X number of rectangles. So, like, the value of Archimago is the flexibility of the rectangles that it's producing. But at a baseline, we can say, every time I draw from my spellbook, I'm drawing 1/3 of a card that my opponent is not drawing. Every 3 turns or every time I draw from my spellbook, every 3 times I do that, I'm drawing 1 more card than my opponent, and that 1 card is going to be something that they're going to have to overcome if they aren't producing their own rectangles. And then there's the additional layers of, like, if you're flashing back Wrath effects or something like that,
Yeah. Okay, so then we're looking at Avatar of Air after that, and this one just allows you to do some movement.
Yeah, and this is where it's really cool to apply rectangle theory to a game that where position can count for cards, right? Or like the value of positioning can be the value of actual what rectangles would otherwise be. So this theory is coming from Magic. In Magic, there's no positional gameplay. The board is the board. There's no like one square is more valuable than another in Magic. So for something like Avatar of Air, which can like either box your opponent in or like stymie their development in some particular way or control the realm, that's where like I think Avatar of Air on this theory would have to go a little bit deeper. Because if you think about every single time you're whatever the movement is that you're doing, I remember when I played against Avatar of Air for the first time, they started on Cloud City. And when Cloud City cut me off of being able to continue my development, I was like, well, I don't know how many cards that's actually worth, but I know it's worth some because now I can't develop any further until that site moves again. You know, so I'm like, okay, so any of the cards that I wanted to play or was planning to play, I'm not going to be able to do that until that site moves or we do something else. So whatever value that whatever that disruption was worth, and that disruption came at no cost, right? The Avatar just did that for them. So like when we get to Witch, it's like when Witch taps to like, you know, tax the opponent. If you think like, oh, well, Avatar just gives you that free tax plus getting you closer to the Avatar, there's all these other elements beyond what just general rectangle theory does, which is, you know, I'm hoping to get feedback on this of like what other players who have played longer than I have, like what their experience is with how valuable positional gameplay can actually be regarding cards. Like, and at what point, I mean, it's really deep, which is what I find so rich about Sorcery. But like, at what point are you like, this positional advantage is worth more than any number of cards that I could draw because this is what the game becomes about? And at what point can you leverage that, and how early can you leverage that, and what cards matter most for that? And then that will help, I would think, help you choose cards for Avatar of Air once we get an additional 40% of the game coming in a new set.
Yeah. Then we look at like Avatar of Earth. It's not really producing rectangles, but it's doing something else, right?
It's offering you power, which means that it wants to get aggressive, which would assume that the rectangles that it's offering you is from a strategy that it's implying that you need to abide by in order to leverage it at all. So this thing is +1 power to each nearby Earth site. It implies that you just have to be aggressive, right? Like the only way that this thing accrues any value is if your opponent dies before they can leverage their rectangles, because you are getting free rate, right? Like if you play a 1 mana 1 power minion, well, this thing makes it 2 power. That's 100% more than what you were paying for, right? The Avatar's offering you that up front. Now, you have to be able to leverage that. The way to leverage power is to just get your opponent dead. So that when in rectangle theory, like if we're coming down to, I would say that every Avatar of Earth player that's not a hyper aggressive strategy is going to lose to more games to just rectangle theory than they otherwise would have if they like leaned into what this Avatar is saying you need to do.
All right, next is the Avatar of Fire. Just so you know, Phil, because I'm sure you've never even seen a fireball get cast. Fireball shoots a projectile. It deals 4 damage on impact and 2 to each other unit at that location. So it's a projectile that hits something, does 4 damage to it, and then 2 damage to everything else that is at that location.
So because it's turning a site into a fireball, so it's not actually generating you any value, right? You had to draw that site.
Yeah.
The time you spend
every other turn, you get a fireball, basically.
Yeah, the value of that site that you're playing is just turning it into something else. Now it's potentially turning. Maybe you don't want any more sites, and so you're just turning it into a card that you can now use. But that's a loot, right? That's a looting effect. That's turning one card, that one rectangle into another rectangle, but it's not actually generating any rectangles. Think like the reason why Avatar of Fire might be softer and not see a lot of competitive play is because the value that it's offering you is also not guaranteed, right? That one rectangle could become could be a 4-for-1 in the right circumstance. But because your opponent knows that it's face up, they'll just never actually position themselves in a way where you'll get to leverage it. And so this becomes a Punisher avatar where like they know never to position themselves in such a way where the fireball will actually be able to be leveraged. And so without hidden information, Avatar of Fire becomes a lot softer. And because it's not saying, tap, shoot a fireball. If it's a tap, shoot a fireball, instead of this turn, sites in your hand become fireballs, then it's generating you a free rectangle, right? That's the difference.
Exactly.
But like the difference between turning a card into something else versus just straight up generating a card is the difference between your opponent being able to survive at death's door or not, right?
I think an interesting point here is when we later compare like Geomancer and Pathfinder to Avatar of Fire, because they're also converting some amount of sites into cards. but we'll talk about how that's sort of different and why it's different.
Yeah, and also just to know as we go into our second suite of avatars to talk about, this is a theory that I thought about when playing Seer. This is not like a fully fleshed out idea when it comes to sorcery yet. This is just in the early stages because we're going to be getting so many avatars all
Yeah.
at once, and it's
That'd
just
be a
like,
good way to evaluate. Yeah.
how do we evaluate? How do we as a community like evaluate these cards and talk about them? Especially with all of the SCG coming up in Q1 of next year, like the turnaround time of being able to analyze these avatars is going to be relatively fast. And so, how do we do that? This is sort of a way to simplify that down, so that way we can actually talk about it. And then, of course, the synergies will arise, but at least on day one, we'll have a baseline to talk about them.
So, of these first four, Phil, which would you say? Just gut feeling. Which do you think is the strongest?
So,
using rectangle theory,
we know that the first two, Archimago and Avatar of Air, are the strongest, but it's also clear that
not for nothing, Avatar of Earth is very, very potent as well.
So Avatar of Earth is potent in that it's linear, right? It's potent in that, like, if you do the one thing that Avatar of Earth asks you to do, it will likely be the best at doing that one thing, right? Which is that's like putting you on rails or giving you a strategy or leaning into what it's offering. Like you're leveraging the power level that it offers. Whereas in a vacuum of like how powerful is this avatar? Okay, well, if Avatar of Earth is good in exactly one context, which is getting super blunt aggro, then yeah, it's the best aggro avatar of these things. And if you're carrying, if you go into day one and you're like, I just want, while my opponents are stumbling, I want to get aggressive, then certainly Avatar of Earth is, of these top four, the ones that are going to reward that the most, because it's straight up telling you what it wants, and if you give it what it wants, it will return you in kind.
Yeah, I think an important thing to think about too here, is what is the value of ending the game, right? Like, how many rectangles is that worth, right? Like, if your opponent doesn't get to draw 5 more cards because they're dead, did you create 5 cards for yourself somehow? I mean, it is a what's the sound of one hand clapping kind of question, but something
I
to
think
think
a way
about.
to also like look at it is you could look at it from the other side as well, right? So Avatar of Earth isn't offering you any free rectangles the way that a lot of other avatars do. If you sat down with Avatar of Earth against an opponent who was getting to generate free rectangles, it becomes, is the metagame of the avatars that are generating those free rectangles, are those free rectangles in some way going to compensate and reward my opponent more than what my avatar is doing, right? Like, if Avatar of Earth is giving me +1 power, but my opponent just getting to put a Tawny into play every turn and block that thing, is that and stymieing my development to the point where now I'm getting overrun and my avatar is not producing me any rectangles once that the initial onslaught is handled, then did I just lose before the game really even started because my opponent just had a rectangle producing avatar and I didn't, right? Like, we want to avoid the avatars that are essentially not going to be able to keep up with opposing avatars because there's no requisite for the buy-in, right? Like, you get to choose whatever avatar you want. I get to choose whatever avatar I want. There are some avatars that have some sort of explicit drawback or deck building constraint that you have to abide by. Pathfinder is the big example that always comes to my head. But the other ones that are build arounds that like may suggest things that you can do, but don't actually factually limit what you're doing, right? Pathfinder is saying you just don't start with 3 cards, right? Your opponent has 3 more cards in hand than you. That's just how that is how it starts. That is an incredible concession to make. So the offset of that power level of whatever rectangles it's producing has to be significant in order to overcome the fact that like 3 cards is gigantic.
Yeah,
So
I mean, there's an implicit, like, you have to play air sites, you have to play earth sites, you have to play fire sites, you have to play water sites, but you don't have to. You could just make this an avatar that just plays or draws a site. If you didn't want to do that, you could build that way, but I don't think that's even worth exploring.
Well, because every avatar plays or taps to play or draw a site, that's a baseline vacuum, right? There's no comparison to that. Everyone gets to do it.
Yeah,
you're not going to be able to leverage.
You're always
that better
better off
than your opponent.
if your opponent, if you have no earth sites in your deck, you're always better off playing literally any other avatar aside from Avatar of Earth.
Yeah.
Right.
So on the Avatar of Air, once per turn, if you occupy an air site, you can fly a unit atop it to a nearby site. So that's King's move, right? So if you were to say, Zach, if I were to say, Zach, can you tell me what you think the value of a King's move on any of your minions every turn is, right? Assume that it says once per turn. Assume that because your avatar is always going to be something that you'll be able to move. Assume that you'll always be able to leverage its effect. So that's a movement +1 in a King's move that you get to do every turn. What would you say that's worth?
It's worth a blink, right? Like
it's worth a blink.
That is a card. Yeah.
If you were to change what Avatar of Air says to once per turn, you may cast Blink, but don't draw. But like you may cast Blink, but instead of drawing a card, it's just on the avatar, right? So the thing that you drew was just Blink, but like because you didn't have to spend your draw step on it, that's the replacement effect. But if this said once per turn Blink, like that sounds a whole lot more powerful, doesn't it?
Well, that's let's go down to Avatar of Water, which basically has that text, right? Like flood an adjacent site to your body of water until you do so again. You may teleport there, right? Like that's what you're doing. That is, it's close enough to the text of Blink, right? Like,
so what I want to know is for Avatar of Water, I haven't played against Avatar of Water yet, but Avatar of Water, you may teleport there means that the Avatar of Water can teleport there, right? Not another
you
minion.
as a human being that's playing the game.
It's not like you can't teleport another minion within your body of water to that.
That's correct.
Right? It has to be the Avatar of Water moving.
Yeah.
So there is a constraint, right? Like if Avatar of Air said you may fly instead of fly by a nearby unit, it said you may fly there, right? That changes. So like Avatar of Air versus Avatar of Water, Avatar of Air clearly is more flexible. So in a vacuum, if you didn't have the context of like, okay, well, what's a body of water look like?
Well,
in terms
what's
of
flood worth,
and,
right? That's not what is flood worth,
right?
You know, like that's another thing. Like, well, if you get rid of a root spider because you flood a site and then you teleport there, is that worth 2 cards?
And this is where rectangle theory can become valuable when analyzing a thing. If you're saying, okay, I'm looking at what my avatar is offering me, how many rectangles is that worth? Avatar of Earth giving +1 power for each nearby Earth site. That's like really powerful because that's the Avatar of Earth gaining that power, right? So the Avatar of Earth being the only thing that's gaining that power, if it said like you can give a minion +1 power and so you can pick and choose positionally where you are, but like Avatar of Earth isn't offering you any flexibility. It's only this thing that gets to do it. Avatar of Water is offering you flexibility in that if it's touching your body of water, you can flood a site. That could give you a couple of options. And then you may teleport there, so it's not mandatory. But the fact that you can't move, you can only move the Avatar of Water is saying, okay, you now need to, in order for me to be leveraged, you need to somehow build me up. You need to build my avatar up. Avatar of Air is saying, you do whatever the hell you want. You can move whatever you want. I can sit back. I can go forward. You know, the flexibility is also got to be worth something when it comes to what is this worth if you were able to put it into raw cards. Because Avatar of Air says once per turn blink. Avatar of Water does not say blink.
Important to also note, Phil, and we'll move on to the other avatars in a second, but out of all the avatar ofs, right, only Avatar of Air isn't really asking you to tap it to use its ability, right? Like if you want to get any value out of your Avatar of Earth, you need to attack with it, right? Like that's truly what you're trying to do there. The same and every other one says tap, right? So Avatar of Air is kind of a clear outlier just because you don't have to take a turn off of developing to use its ability, and you don't have to use its ability on itself even,
And if you think about that, that's also like, okay, once per turn I get to blink, but it doesn't mess up my development. That's worth something, right? If we're sitting down opposing avatars, if you're the only one that doesn't actually have to stymie its development to get the blink, that's worth a card.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to Battle Mage. Battle Mage has 3 power, right? Whenever Battle Mage attacks and kills an enemy, you may draw a card. Now that's not a rectangle a turn, obviously, right?
Well, what it is asking you it is challenging you to do something, right? Like if you can leverage me to kill things, I will reward you by giving you rectangles.
Now that's only if you can leverage it attacking and killing things. You can't grapple shot and then draw a card and then tap and draw a card, and then tap it to hit a guy with an attack and draw a card. So you're only, for the most part, there are cards that you can use to get around this. Screaming Skull is a great example where you can checker across the board if things are lined up correctly, right? But this is drawing you some number of cards over the course of a game between the trade-off of life for attacks, right, that you're doing on your opponent's creatures, right? You're probably going to remove something, right?
What would you value the additional +2 power from every other avatar we've talked about so far? All of the other avatars have 1 power. Battle Mage has 3 power. What is the additional 2 power worth in terms of cards?
It's a hard thing to gauge, but I would say it's worth at least a minion, right? Like you basically are saying like you've drawn a minion that, you know, as with any minion, the opportunity to attack with it is you know, dependent on the board, right? But like you basically have a attacking minion at 3 power, which is nothing to scoff at, for the entire game as an option.
Starting the game with a 3 power, like knowing that if your opponent drops a 2 power minion on the table, that your avatar can contend with it and remove it from the realm. That there is some inherent value in that, right? So like whether it's like Archie, where it's a third of a card or it's half of a card, or like you're saying, if it's worth a minion, and you know that's worth a card, it's worth a 2 power minion. Like whatever that inherent value is, we can say it's some percentage of a rectangle, and then every time this thing kills something, you can draw another rectangle. Battle Mage is pretty good on rectangle theory, even though it is telling you that in order to get those rectangles, you have to
stop.
It.
Yeah.
You have to make, there is deck building concession in that you have to do things to support it. But if you do that, it will give you rectangles in a way that's a lot more flexible than what Avatar of Earth is doing.
Now, let's talk about Deathspeaker, which for a while, Phil, this was the best avatar, like one of the best avatars in the game, because I think it really displayed the concept of rectangle theory, right? Like you may play one dead minion from your graveyard, from your cemetery each turn. Sure, the reduction in cost is wonderful too, but the idea that like sometimes it literally is draw a card, you know, it literally, you know, depending on the card that you're using its genesis for, right? Like it might just be draw a card, which is, you know, the most pure rectangle theory, right? Like it puts a card into your hand.
And the other thing about this too, again, and we're noticing, you know, this through the first 7 avatars that we're talking about, it doesn't say tap. It's not tap to do it. You just get to do it once per turn. Once per turn, you can just generate a rectangle. And then that rectangle might generate additional rectangles, but Deathspeaker at a baseline is saying you get to generate a rectangle this turn.
That's actually something that we should take into account when we're talking about these, is the ones that don't make you have to tap to use them. Archimago, Deathspeaker, Dragonlord's coming up. You know, you don't necessarily have to tap to use them. Now, Dragonlord depends on the dragon you choose, right? But like not every dragon has tap text, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting is like, so Archimago says banish 3 spells from your cemetery, copy them, one of them, but that's not gated, right? It's not once per turn you can do that. So you could, in the late game, just start, you know, you could chain your whole graveyard on high mana. Avatar of Error does say once per turn. Deathspeaker says each turn, which is interesting because each turn in, you know, typically I would think, oh, each turn means that I can also do it on my opponent's turn, but there's no threats that you can put into play at instant speed. So, you know, that the wording there like would trip me up if I was coming to the game and didn't know. Without having to tap, you just like once per turn you make cast, it literally like puts your graveyard in your hand. Now it's a limited. You can only use it once for one of your things, but it is literally highlighting a rectangle in your graveyard, and that's just in your hand for the turn if you want to do it.
Yeah. Dragonlord, like I said, we're not gonna. We could literally be here for another whole episode's worth of show for that.
Let's move for Dragonlord. But like what Dragonlord is upon setup, set aside a unique dragon once on your turn. If you meet a threshold, you may pay 3 to gain its abilities this turn. So, of course, the most powerful choices regarding rectangle theory is you can just set up, okay, which one is the one that generates the most rectangles for me? Then I will then however many rectangles that produces, yes, you have to meet the threshold requirement, but then after that, it's 3 mana. How many rectangles does 3 mana need to be worth? 3 mana in the threshold. Whatever the most valuable dragon that you're going to get, and it's also like going to get stronger over time. If they were to produce a unique dragon that's like a Grandmaster Wizard dragon, and you're like, okay, so for 3 mana every turn, I'm going to Ancestral because this thing just in setup lets me do that, right? That would be the most like that would take over, right? That would be insanely busted. So I think that like Dragonlord going a little bit deeper because it's asking you to pull another card, but if you applied rectangle theory to all of the options that it has for unique dragons, that would also be able to tell you how powerful is my Dragonlord going to be.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, every time a new dragon comes out, it's basically like a new avatar has come out, right? Like a new unique dragon means you have access to a brand new avatar called Dragon Lord, right?
Like
all right.
when Gothic gives us a unique dragon, that's just like, yeah, spew.
Well, we know
fill the
about
realm with,
Draconian Bone Kite. Like that's one,
yeah, like if they have a unique dragon that's like, great old one, and it's like when this thing enters, flood the realm with skeletons and put 3 skeletons on every site or whatever, you're like, this is going to be insane.
Yeah. We've talked about Druid. We can move past Druid.
Yeah,
Elementalist is one
I'll
that...
say that just before we go to Elementalist, just on Druid, I think the reason that Druid is so powerful is this theory, though.
Yeah, agreed. Elementalist was a avatar that saw play in the early sections of the game, but I think has fallen off specifically because of rectangle theory. How many rectangles is fixing worth? Not a lot if you not playing a 4-color deck.
So think about it like this. I think I agree. I don't think Elementalist is very good because it's not actually producing you anything. So inherently, if you sat Elementalist down against against Deathspeaker, against Druid, against Archie, right? You're sitting down and going, okay, they over the course of a game are going to draw what, 6 cards, right? And so your avatar is not providing you any cards. So you're going to have to somehow compensate for those 6 cards.
Your selection of cards has to be the best possible selection in the game. It's weird, Phil, because with this one, it pulls on 2 sides, right? You have the selection that you have to play, basically any element that continues to get more powerful as the game trudges forward, right? As more things get spoiled, more cards come out, you have access to more things. So it gets more powerful over time because of that. But the better fixing becomes, the less powerful it is because you have to compare it to every other avatar.
And so I think the thing that where you can leverage Elementalist to make up for those cards is all of the other avatars so far. They are generating the good ones, at least, are generating some sort of value, and it's clear what those things are. They're asking it for you. Elementalist isn't as clear. It's going, oh, it's giving me all 4 elements. That means that I can cast things that have all 4 elements, and that'll be cleaner. I actually think the strongest versions of where Elementalist would be able to take you, given rectangle theory, is if I have to overcome the 6 cards that my opponents are inherently going to draw just by virtue of their avatar existing. Elementalist offloading the burden of sites to give me threshold means that I can lean into the sites that might provide me value, but not threshold.
Yeah. Good call.
So,
yeah.
So if you think
you can play
at a
Sinkhole
baseline
or something, yeah.
You could start with 4 Leyline 4 Leyline Henge in your Atlas, and those draw a card for each adjacent Leyline Henge, right? But they don't provide any threshold. But at a baseline, from when you sit down with Elementalist, right? Every single element threshold, or any card that has only 1 element threshold, that is not going to require a site to play. You'll still need the mana, yes, but you won't need the element. So the virtue of going, all of these sites are now unburdened from any of these cards that I want to play that are single element cards in any way, even if they're all 4 elements. But if they're single element, you could play all of the 4 element dragons that Dragon Lord plays with no element cards, no element sites in your deck. You could just be playing all value sites, right? So all of the other players that need to play dual sites to get their threshold, Elementalist is saying, don't even worry about that. You need to make up 6 cards in your Atlas. And so I actually look at Elementalist as an Atlas value avatar, more so than the threshold would be providing to draw cards, because it's unburdening what your Atlas needs to do.
Yeah. Now I can answer Enchantress. You're drawing an extra card to 2 cards every single time that you play an aura.
Yeah. And
so every time there's an aura in play, that aura now has text that this is also a creature, right? So you can basically say every time you are converting an aura into a creature, you have drawn a card.
And the value of Enchantress is the first one that tacks text onto another card, pretty much, right? When you play an aura, your opponent knows that thing can now attack it at some point if it's not dealt with. But then there's also the positional leveraging points that Enchantress gets to get, similar to the other avatars that care about movement, because you can animate your Plague or your other ones that
Thunderstorm.
like
Yeah.
kill things and like move it around so that way it stays longer than it otherwise would and kills
Exactly.
something else. That's an additional 2 cards, right? If it kills something and
Yeah,
survives
if
another
I
turn when
move,
it
if
otherwise.
I get to move my Black Plague into a silence as a creature, and then it doesn't proc at the end of my turn, and then I move it over to an opponent's other creature in the next turn, and it does proc, then like that's huge. I've netted several cards at that point.
There's also the implicit value that Enchantress is getting by unburdening a bunch of stuff in deck building. So what we just talked about with Elementalist, where it's like, oh yeah, you don't have to worry about playing dual sites or your tri sites or whatever. I got all that covered. You play the value sites, play your Wizard Den, play the site that ancestrals you, like play all the stuff that doesn't give you any threshold, because I'm going to provide that for you. I'm taking on that burden so you can get your cards elsewhere. Enchantress is also doing that in that you don't need to play minions.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, you will be able to attack and get your opponent to death's door with your auras, so you can spend all of your other cards that would otherwise need to be spent to killing your opponent, because your Enchantress is saying your spellbook is unburdened from having to play minions. I will cover that for you, so you can do other things that you want to do. There's also value in that. Like, how many rectangles does that generate? Whatever cards you put in implicitly versus whatever. Like, when I was playing Archie, everybody was like, "Yeah, you got to play Kettletop. It's your best thing."
Yeah.
And I agree, it's really good. But like, at the same time, as I learned how Archie worked, I was like, I want to get every minion out of my deck, because every minion does not work with what it's asking me to do to give me as many rectangles as I.
All right, let's move on to Flamecaller. So Flamecaller taps to banish all your dead fire minions. Dead fire minions is important. Shoot a projectile. It deals damage equal to the sum of their fire. So first off, you have to play fire, you have to play minions, and you have to play a lot of fire threshold minions. You don't want to just like get like just your easy to cast guys out, right?
And this is tap. So it's not like at the beginning of your turn, okay, banish all your dead minions, shoot the projectile, clear the way, then play a bunch of spells that refill your cemetery, do it again, right? You can't do that line. So tapping is also a huge cost. And as you can see, there's a lot of huge costs here. And again, similar to Avatar of Fire, the card that it generates is not like trying to figure out what the value of that is so difficult to figure out. And because it's a projectile and your opponent can see it on board, they will never actually let you leverage it in a maximal capacity. So you now have to also overcome the fact that the information is known and play stuff like movement that corrals your
like
opponent's
blaze
stuff
or something.
into a
Yeah, of course.
projectile's lane.
Which means you're not playing minions. Yeah, there's a dichotomy here. I mean, it's the same thing with Enchantress, where you can't just play all enchantments, right? All auras. You have to mix it up. But this one I think is a little bit more restrictive, and the fact that it says banish all your dead minions, right? So anytime you want to use this, you don't get to like kind of decide how much you want to do. It's every single dead minion in the yard. Then you have to start all over again.
So, and the value of it is really leaning towards, okay, what is the highest density threshold things that I can get, and then what are the ways that I can put them in the cemetery faster? And like, it's such a linear plan, and you have to tap, but like, now there is like, I could see Flamecaller as like, okay, you are aligned against your opponent's avatar, and so if you can figure out a way to like, essentially flip your library, like this is the oops all spells to me avatar, right? Like if you can flip your spell book as quickly as possible, so that way you can tap and just shoot
there are cards that do that now. There are cards that seem like they mill and stuff like that, where like, if imagine being like, hey, I'm just gonna play that card that discards a card, I'll put Samael in the yard. He's got a 4 threshold. That's 4 damage that you get to do, right?
And so now it's like, looking at rectangle theory, it's like, okay, Flamecaller fails rectangle theory. So if our challenge, let's say we were challenged, we had to assume the position that we have to play Flamecaller. Okay, well then what's the way that we do that? Well, we have to do something that is like antagonistic to rectangle theory, because it has no interest in that.
Yeah.
So if we want to see, okay, what's the most powerful way that we can play Flamecaller, this is a combo piece, right? That is what it's asking of you. The same way the Avatar of Earth is asking one specific thing in order to overcome what rectangle theory inherently does for avatars. Flamecaller has to do the same, but Flamecaller is doing it as a combo. It's like, okay, what are the things that are going to put all this stuff in my yard, and anything other than that is not going to be as powerful, right? Like, because that's what card does.
All right, let's slide through the rest of these real fast. So Geomancer is so basically the way the play pattern works with Geomancer is it basically allows you to draw 3 to 4 cards over the course of the game because you're not drawing sites, right? So it's a pretty easy, like, this produces, assuming that the game goes long enough, produces about 4 rectangles.
Yeah, because the tap to replace an adjacent rubble with the topmost site of your atlas, it's combining the play or draw site part of the top. So the fact that you get to play and draw a site is saving you a full turn cycle. And so if you were to do that, yeah, as you said, 4 times over the course of a game, that's 4 additional spells that you got to draw off of your spell book, not to mention whatever the positional advantages of putting rubble in a place where you're, and developing a little bit further so you can move faster if you wanted to. You could build the rubble in one way and then move atop it while building out in the other direction. So implicit are the movement advantages, but this one actually straight up is saying, I will produce for you. The longer this game goes, the more rectangles I will produce until the realm is full.
Yeah, well, that is the other thing. You're limited by until the realm is full.
Limited and the realm is full, or unless you're playing things that destroy sites, right?
Yeah.
Because if you can turn something into rubble, you can then play a site for free atop it.
Yeah. Necromancer. I think if you're playing Necromancer right, Necromancer is producing a rectangle for you every turn.
I think Necromancer, just on this theory by like alone, and this early in the game's like history, I think Necromancer is just going to be one of the most powerful avatars available, because all it's asking is, whenever you have leftover mana, produce a rectangle.
Yeah, this is not waiting for you to play a Tawny. This is putting a Tawny into play every single turn. Now, Tawny has obviously different text than a skeleton, but skeletons can defend. They just can't move to defend. So I don't know. I really like the synergies when we were messing around with Necromancer before.
And I think Necromancer is also going to be fun to play because of how many rectangles it produces for free. It's just going to give you more things to do and more choices to make over the course of a game because it's providing you so much value. Literally from turn 1, you know that you will never have unspent mana. That just will not exist. And how much value is that worth? Like, you're like, oh man, I really want to cast this 3-drop and this 4-drop, and I have 6 mana. I'm going to waste 3 mana this turn because I have nothing to put it into. How much unspent mana over the course of a game is worth a rectangle?
Yeah,
right?
Good call. All right, Pathfinder, very similar to Geomancer, but you're getting movement and you don't have to draw sites.
But the discount, there's a bunch of caveats that come with that. You can't have redundant sites in your atlas, and you have to start without any atlas or without any sites in your hand at the start of a game.
Yeah, so everything's random.
So everything is random. You don't have, I mean, unless you're playing the stuff that like filters, but there's opportunity cost in that, right? Like you're playing those sites instead of something else. Now, the difference, though, is that you are getting to tap to develop. So you're both drawing the site and playing the site. So
and moving.
Moving aside, because moving is really difficult because moving can have a double-edged sword, because this is not movement you choose, right? This is movement you have to go to that space. So like, your opponent's going, okay, well, they're built out that way. They can only move to these spots now. They can't develop the other way because they have to build adjacent to Pathfinder. So that limits the options. So there's a bunch of caveats that Pathfinder, is saying you have to make these concessions. The upside is, okay, similar to Geomancer, I'm going to get to not have to play and draw. I can do it all. So it's like, how many sites do you need to flip over in order to overcome the 6 cards your opponents get to draw for free off of their most powerful avatars?
Yeah. Seer. I think, this is where you started, right? Like this is why this theory is relevant, because Seer does not produce rectangles.
Seer's not producing any rectangles, and then what the scry that it's doing, like, unless you're doing something where it matters what's on the bottom of your spellbook or atlas at all times. Like, let's say there was a card that said, name a card, reveal the bottom card of your spellbook. If you're correct, draw 2 cards or something,
sure,
right? Like,
yeah.
If there was like that sort of thing that you could guarantee was accruing,
you can convert it, yeah.
But again, that's some other piece outside of your avatar that your avatar is now enabling. It's not something inherent to your avatar, and so it's not guaranteed, right? Even if something like that did exist, it's not guaranteed because you have to find that other thing. Whereas like, you're always going to put a Tawny into play on turn 1. That's guaranteed. Every time you sit down with Druid, Tawny's touching the table on turn 1.
Yep. I would say again, like Geomancer, Sorcerer draws you 3 to 4 cards in a game. If a game goes long, Sorcerer draws you a whole hell of a lot more cards. But over the course of a pretty average game, you're going to get about 3 to 4 cards out of a Sorcerer.
Yeah, and so like looking at Necromancer says you're guaranteed to get a 1/1 every turn if you put a mana into it. Sorcerer is tapped, but it is guaranteeing you a rectangle every turn. And so,
well, not every turn. You're going to have to start by playing sites, right? So you're asking for build concessions here. If you want to leverage this, like you need to play cores, you need to, you need to lower your curve. You don't want to build out the realm. You want like 5 or 6 sites, and then you want to be drawing an extra card every single turn.
The other thing that's really powerful too is if you're playing any cards that say untap a unit or untap something nearby, if you can
twiddle like your helpful hob. Yeah.
If you can twiddle your sorcerer to like overcome that middle gap that you're talking about of being able to like, okay, this is a tap ability, which inherently means that I have to trade my development to get the thing. But knowing that over the course of a game, if you can survive development or complete development to any position, that your avatar will then inherently provide you rectangles becomes really powerful. And is also why, like, even though it's very simple, it's very basic, draw a spell, the power level of drawing a card every turn is just like, here's another rectangle, more options, more things. And then those rectangles can beget rectangles, and that's rectangle theory.
Similar situation with Spark Mage, where like, I mean, how much is a part of a lightning bolt worth it every turn once you've developed, right? Because you still have to move around to be able to use this ability. It's random. There's a reason why we don't see Spark Mage as like a top tier avatar, because it's asking a little too much of you and really pigeonholing you into a specific kind of deck.
Yeah, and it also, because it's random, it's sort of like, it's a tap ability, so that is, again, going to stymie development to some degree. It's unreliable because it's random, but if you are spending your time playing air spells, it falls in the middle ground where it can produce you rectangles, right? Like, depending on how, like, there's a whole bunch of uncertainty to the rectangles that it's generating you, but this is representative of a rectangle. So if you were to say, okay, what's more powerful, Seer or Spark Mage, I would say, like, well, in a vacuum at rectangle theory, Spark Mage is more powerful because it can generate you rectangles.
Yeah, agreed.
Seer cannot generate you rectangles. Spark Mage could generate you rectangles. The value of what they are.
It can at least deprive your opponent of rectangles that they have produced.
Yeah,
right? And that's worth something.
It is literally worth squares on the realm, right? Seer is not producing any squares or taking any squares off the realm,
because squares are a different thing in this game.
Sorry, rectangles on the realm. You know what I mean? Like, so when looking at this theory, you're like, okay, well, yeah, Spark Mage clearly not as powerful as Sorcerer or Necromancer or Geomancer, pretty obviously, but like, it might be more powerful than Seer, right? Because at this baseline, it is actually doing something for me beyond the cards in my hand.
It's certainly more powerful than Spellslinger, which says you get 1 extra rectangle.
Right? It's like, very clearly, this thing will provide you exactly 1 rectangle.
Yeah,
and then if you're like, okay, well,
baseline 1 rectangle
against any other avatar that's like, I'm going to give you 6 rectangles over the course of a game. You're like, okay, well, then it's better than Spellshaper.
Yeah. Now, this is to that end, Phil. This is the draft avatar, that like base draft avatar. If you didn't draft an avatar, you get to use this. So
sure, and it's
rare that people are going to be like, oh yeah, I want to use Spellslinger. All right, Templar. It's got a 2 power, and it makes knights, dames, and sirs cost 1 less. So reduction in mana cost is not really a rectangle per se, but
it's not.
Skipping a turn, getting thing out a turn earlier can produce rectangles in that. Like, how many rectangles is haste worth, right? Like, think of it like that.
Yeah. Everything, if you think, okay, if I'm playing Templar and I'm playing the Knight Sir Damed deck, and I know that every single card in my deck, or every single minion in my deck, rather, is going to get the Templar reduction, then you go, okay, that means that if you were to, like, just straight up take all of your entire minion suite, right, in your spell book, and then remove the mana cost and replace it with 1 mana cost lower, how many sites fewer is that over the course of a game that you would need to draw? That's how many cards this thing is potentially worth, right? It's like, oh, my most expensive avatar, or my most expensive minion, cost me 6 mana, right? I know I never need to draw my 6th mana because my avatar is going to be able to produce it for me to be able to cast this minion.
Yeah,
so
now you can just continually draw draw spells.
So that the spells. So like, and the same thing. It's like, okay, well, if I play nothing but minions that are capped at 3 mana, then you never need to actually draw your third sight, and you're like, okay, I'm going to play and deploy like these like cheap efficient minions where I'm only going to be drawing cards for the spells from my spell book every turn, and I'm just going to play on my opponent's sites because I never actually need to get more than what that is. If those knights then, like with their lance tokens or if they have ranged or whatever other value those things are providing, it's saying I am offering you not having to draw any sites, and I'm offering you a cheaper rate on whatever rectangles those cards are producing. So you have to go a little bit further to figure out rectangles for this one, but it is pretty implicit that like this is generating you cardboard.
Yeah. Let's skip over to Witch real fast because Witch is kind of doing the opposite thing in its taxing ability, right? But then, so we can discuss that a little bit. But I do want to say like -3 power to a avatar is kind of not worth anything for the most part.
Maybe that gets better when more avatars come in, right?
Sure,
like right
sure,
now,
sure.
the only one that really is taxing is Battle Mage.
I'm sure we're going to see another like battle avatar of some kind in the next set. But the thing about this one is the 2 damage over the course of the game, especially if a game goes long and you're trying to kind of go long with Witch, right? Over the course of the game, zapping for 2, that to the opposite of Templar is her ability to tax the opponent, and then what is time worth in this game? How many rectangles is time worth? If you can stop your opponent from casting a spell on curve or doing anything for an entire turn, that's worth some number of rectangles, right? If you can stop your opponent from being able to play the game properly, because they couldn't cast the spell that they need to on curve, that's a big deal.
And I actually think Witch is the type of avatar that gains the most from knowing when it sits down the other avatar across the table, right? Because if you're sitting down from what is very obviously has to be like if everybody were to subscribe to rectangle theory, it's like, okay, in order for my opponent's avatar to leverage rectangle theory to its utmost, they have to be super aggressive. So I'm going to sit down with Witch, and the first opportunity that I don't need to play or draw a sight, I'm going to tax their shit, right? They're just getting taxed because I know that slowing them down is going to be more like might just draw me a time walk, right? They might not be able to play, the 2 spells that they wanted, and that draws me a full turn. Same thing. And then if you're playing against something that wants to go long, like let's say you're playing against Archie or you're playing against Sorcerer, or any of the cards, the ones that generate a ton of value and want to leverage that value going long, then being the aggressive side of things of like, okay, I'm going to tax you 2 life. And then we're looking at, okay, what are the cards that can help do either of those things, right? Because if you sit down with Witch knowing like, okay, I'm going to be the tax deck, then you're inherently going to be soft to the players that are like, I wasn't planning on doing much
under.
anyway.
Yeah.
I was just going to sit back and develop, and I was waiting for you to come at me. And if you're just going to not do anything to me other than tax me, like I'm cool passing the game back and forth because I have an avatar that's generating me rectangles. That's all well and good. And then same thing if you're like, I'm going to be super aggressive Witch and I'm just draining you every time. And it's like, okay, well then you're going to walk into my game plan because then I know that like this is how you built your deck, and I'm just going to sequence my spells of like knowing that you're going to try and tax me 2 life every turn. So I'll prioritize my life gain or whatever. So Witch I think needs to like search for cards that are flexible because the rectangles that it's going to gain are going to be dependent on what it's trying to do, what the opponent doesn't want to have done to it.
Yeah. Wave Shaper, Phil, I want to ask you a question since this is based on limited. One of the all-time best limited cards of Magic the Gathering is Icy Manipulator, right? Being able to stop your opponent from being able to attack you by tapping creatures is a big deal. Messing with their mana, also a big deal. Not that this does that, it just turns it into water. But flooding a site is probably not worth a ton most of the time, right? Like maybe you get lucky and you hit a Root Spider, but like if you're playing against Wave Shaper, you're probably not gonna throw your Root Spider somewhere where it can be a problem. But
the flooding a site is probably not worth a full rectangle, but it does have some value because it does power up some other cards. So it's not worth nothing. It is worth a percentage of a card.
Yeah. But the tapping and keeping tapped the other guys is worth however many guys you can tap over the course of the game, right? Like you can now. Tapping a guy isn't worth a rectangle, right? Like if you keep him tapped for the entire game, I suppose that is 1 rectangle you've taken from your opponent, right? But there's opportunity cost there. Like if you can stop your opponent from killing you with a guy for the course of 4 or 5 turns while you turn the corner, that's worth more than the one rectangle that creature was, right?
And you can flood a site that's already water, right? Like
correct. It's near includes the area that it's talking about, right?
Right. So
just like adjacent really includes the area it's talking about.
What it is it's really just like tap anywhere in your body of water, tap all minions in any square that's in your body of water.
And just outside of it. Yeah.
And just outside of it if you extend it, right? If you flood it. I mean, I think Wave Shaper, it is producing you cards in that you know that when it's valuable in your body of water, you can just lock anything down. So like knowing that like within your body of water, your Wave Shaper can produce you rectangles in that like, yes, they're positional. Yes, they might generate time, but they also can do a thing where it's like, I want to attack this site and I'm going to lock down this creature that was going to block. And now we're there. That's worth a card, right? That turn where they were going to block whatever the attack on that site was, that rectangle that was going to block ain't there anymore, right? So even though it's not guaranteed, but knowing that you can go in, that your Wave Shaper is going to, like, at the end of the day, rectangle theory is what value is my avatar actually providing me? And there's some value that's harder to quantify than others. Literal rectangles are really easy to quantify. It's literal rectangles. I can do things with those things. Whereas like a scry every turn off of Seer, what is that actually worth? Like how many times do I need to scry before it's worth a card? It's so hard to calibrate that, particularly in like I thought it was going to be valuable to find me my uniques and uniques and elites better. But inherent in me wanting to use that ability to find my uniques and elites better, my uniques and elites that I was finding with it then needed to overcompensate for all the cards that my avatar wasn't otherwise drawing me. So,
and that's just, it's not as as we begin to sign off here, it's not as potent now as it was when we were in 40-20, and going from 50-30 to 60-30, right? It's going to be even less potent. But Phil, I think, to kind of tie this all in a bow, is that once the new set drops, we're going to have to come back and look and kind of rank these avatars by rectangle theory and see of the new ones, which ones prescribe to that theory, which ones kind of avoid it. If you look at something like I think Templar or which kind of avoids it a little bit, but Avatar of Earth and Battle Mage kind of avoid rectangle theory. They're doing something totally different, right?
Battle Mage leans into it a little bit. Avatar of Earth,
drawing cards is rectangles, right?
Yeah, but it's doing so in a way where it's like, here's your quest, and if you can solve that quest, I'll reward you with rectangles. Other avatars just say, all you got to do is play the game, I'll give you rectangles. And the ones that have the lowest barrier to entry are then the ones that can be the most flexible. Like we can see aggro Druid, which we've seen 6 different variations of that have done well at the top tables. But you could also see like, I'm going to play more controlling Druid because I know that I'm going to have this body that I can use every turn for a bunch of various effects, right? Like same thing with Archie. Like if you wanted to get Archie leans control, just because the more cards that you draw over the course of a game, the more rectangles it will provide you. So it's incentivizing for the game to go long.
Final note. Type down in the comment section, everybody, Dragon Lord. When we hit 500 and 1,000, we will be giving out a Dragon Lord. If you have typed in Dragon Lord, and if you do it on this video and the other video, that's okay. You can do it on more than one video. Just don't do it multiple times.
And for this one, though,
video,
type in Dragon Lord to get into the entry, but then also add in which current or available unique dragon actually provides the strongest rectangle theory Dragon Lord.
And so I was going to say, pick your favorite avatar and type in how many rectangles it provides you over the course of a game. With that said, everybody, thanks for watching, and we will catch you on the flip later on. Hey, thanks for watching, and if you get a moment, remember to like and subscribe to the video.
Also, don't forget to join us on Patreon at patreon.com/eternaldurdles in the Magician's tier.
Your support means a lot, and it helps us keep pumping out this content. Thanks so much.
Keep contesting the realm.